Hey everyone, my name is Corel, and today we're going to be doing a quick lesson on how to tune a PID. So first off, there are a few different things here. We've got two different types of PID, and I'm going to lock this in place here so we can see what's going on. We've got a standard PID, and this is capable of dealing with several different inputs and outputs, several different signals here. You can see what the inputs and outputs are available here. We've got altitude above sea level, basically a bunch of different altitude inputs. We've got roll, pitch, and yaw. Alright, so the other thing that we need to check is the outputs. We've got propulsion on pitch, we've got roll, we've got vertical or lift translation. We've got air pump fraction, and we've got hydrofoil angle. We've got A, B, and C. Those are basically miscellaneous axes that we can use to control whatever. And then we've got primary, secondary, and tertiary stimulus, which are basically just more miscellaneous drives these days. It used to be that the stim drives were the main forwards propulsion, but those days have passed and those are no longer applicable. So we can go over here into the fake set point responder. This is basically the movement UI that we're used to seeing here. And what this is going to do is tell us where the set point or the desired output should be. So if I put this to hover and I set hover up or down on this, and I go over here into the PID side and say I want that to mean altitude above sea level, and we're going to control, let's see, the propulsion vertical. That will let us set up a PID that will give us lift control and balancing. We're not going to do that right now though. What we're going to do is destroy that, and we're going to deal directly with AI PIDs for the most part. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is take a look at tuning a PID. We've got the three PIDs here. I've got them set to yaw, pitch, and pitch, roll, and hover, which are the three movement axes that I've got covered by my propulsion here. And what we're going to do is try and balance these. If I unlock this vehicle here, you can see it's jittering all over the place. And unfortunately, we're going to have to let it jitter here because tuning a PID while you've got a vehicle locked in place will usually result in unintended consequences. So we're going to just unlock this here and tune this as quickly as we can. First thing to do, I'm going to edit roll first. I like to start with about a 0.05 gain, a 7-second integral, and about, let's start with a 0.5 derivative for now. And then we're going to enable a fake set point because we want this vehicle to not roll, and that's going to be set to 0. Alright, so we're seeing a lot of oscillation here. This blue line is the drive, and let's just set this all the way down to 0.001. Alright, so that seems to have done the trick. What that means is likely this vehicle has a ton of control authority and is able to control super hard. So it really has way too much control authority for the weight of the vehicle. In some cases adding mass to the vehicle can help with this, but right now I'm just going to try and mess with the PIDs and get this as stable as I can. Okay, so roll looks to be fairly stable. Let's go ahead and close out of that. And we're going to edit the pitch controller next. And 0.001 seemed to work well for a starting point for roll, so let's set that for pitch. And our pitch is a lot more stable now. Let's go ahead and enable the fake set point because we want to say always be at 0 pitch. Now let's go ahead and set the integral to 7 seconds again. And really this is flying pretty straight and level now. Yeah, that looks like pretty much all we needed to do. Okay, so that was actually a lot easier than I thought. Another thing that we can do is edit the hover controller, and let's set a fake set point up at 100 meters. So now this is going to try and fly us up to and hover us at 100 meters. And this hover controller actually appears to be doing a fine job, but yeah, if you don't need the integral and derivative terms, you can set these off. If you set the derivative time to 0 seconds, the derivative is effectively off. If you have the integral at 250, the integral is effectively off. Alright, so let's take a look here, and we have some wobble here. You'll notice that we're not vibrating back and forth around the set point. We're not vibrating back and forth rapidly. We have wobble instead. So the way we deal with wobble is by taking a look at our integral and reducing that as much as possible. And if we reduce the integral too low here, I'm going to set that at 5 to start. If we notice that changing the integral really isn't doing a whole lot for this wobble here, then we start adding derivative in. And there we go. Just a little bit of derivative, flatten that right out. So derivative counters wobble. You don't want to set your derivative too high. In fact, you want it as low as possible. You don't want to set your integral too high. In fact, you want that about as low as possible. You want the gain about as high as possible. So what we're going to do here is now start increasing the gain until we start seeing jitter. And we can see that both physically out here in the world and also in this line here. So right now it looks like we are seeing that stabilize. If I was to say try and go up to 200 meters instead, we should see that respond almost instantly because we've got our gain set so high. And now we are balancing out. If we take a look at our actual altitude here, we are almost dead on the money at 200 meters. And it looks like we are descending right to there. Yep, we are going to hit 200 right on the money. 0.1. And yeah, looks like we have balanced out right at 200 meters. So that's how you balance a PID. We can go back and let's just tinker with some numbers here now that we've gotten our initial tuning out of the way, and we'll just see what we can do with this. We've got our pitch controller here. Let's start just increasing the gain on this. Okay. And let's set a fake set point of, say, 5 degrees here, just to introduce some movement. This is a very good way of introducing movement so that you can see how quickly the vehicle is going to be able to respond to not being at its set point. Now, I'm not particularly fond of those huge spiky bits there, but what we can do here is boost the integral just a little bit. Let's put that up to 10 seconds, actually. And now let's go back to 0 set point. Okay. Still not a huge fan of those spikes over there. The derivative might be a little high in this case. Let's set that down a little ways. And let's try dropping the integral back down, because really we're not getting any jitter, which is what the integral will help counter. And let's try introducing some movement again. Now see here, lowering the derivative and the integral actually reduce the number of spikes going back and forth here. So we're almost dead on right now. If I was to change this up to 30, then we now have pretty much a perfect 30-degree pitch. If I close out of all these things, well, yeah, seeing pitch is pretty difficult, but yeah, we have pretty much a perfect 30-degree angle here. So that's really all there is to it. I'm going to set this back to 0 because I want to fly straight. And there we go. Now, when you're talking about AI-controlled PIDs, often you want to turn the fake set point off. That enables the AI to take control of the pitch of the vehicle. Now, the AI controlling the pitch of the vehicle may or may not be a good thing, depending on what you're wanting to do. In this case, the AI is giving us a pitch down to 30 degrees command, or something. It's giving us a really strict downwards pitch. And we'll get into exactly how all this works, but for now we're just going to set up a point at and maintain distance. And that should, now that we have a behavior, and let's set that as our maneuver. In theory, if I, wow, Yeah, that AI is really wanting to pitch down. So we'll have to get into AI and how that's set up before we fully understand how that's going to interact with these PID controllers. But for now, when you have the pitch controller and a fake set point on, understand that the AI is not controlling this PID. We have set a set point and said 0 degrees. That's always going to be what our pitch is. I don't care what else is going on in the vehicle, what the AI is trying to do. The pitch will be 0. And that's what that PID is trying to achieve. Alright, so that's really all there is to PID tuning. Now, what is PID tuning good for? There's some other things that PIDs do that we haven't really explored yet. One of those things is helping to balance us. So if I take some lead blocks here and start putting things off to the side, we introduced a lot of weight on one side, and our roll, PID, is going to try and balance us as best it can, if it's even possible to do so. And it looks like our PID is not sufficient for this new type of control here. So let's lock our vehicle in place for a moment. Let's edit our roll controller. And let's bump up our gain. The gain on this one is very low. So let's, now that we've got our gain up, having your gain increased, you'll note that all we had to do there was just increase the gain. This is now flying perfectly. The roll is set to 0, and we are pretty well in control of this vehicle. Now you'll note this derivative time here, it's very slow getting back to a flat point, or the desired set point. If we bump the derivative time up a little bit, that should help us get there quicker. That's really what derivative time is for. If you're seeing a lot of accumulated error and it's just not ever making it to the point that you want, adding some derivative time will help with that, in addition to countering the wobble. So a little bit of extra integral time will also help with that. Okay, let's bring that back down. I'm not comfortable with that being that high. And again, keep in mind we want the integral time to be as low as possible. We want the derivative time to be as low as possible. Let's bring our derivative back down if we can. And let's start introducing some fake set points here so that we can see how the vehicle reacts. Okay, so we want to go on a 30-degree angle. That worked out just fine. That's actually pretty near perfect. If I want to increase the derivative, great. Let's try that, and let's set our fake set point back to -30. Now you notice this is a lot spikier, but we came up here and we pretty much nailed that drive right off the bat. Looks like we're wavering around a little bit, so yeah, I think I'm going to go back to the 0.5 on that. And I think that's really our about optimal there. I can keep trying to increase the gain and just see what happens here. But I want to make sure that I'm not increasing that too much. If I set this back to 0, yeah, that is just about perfect. We've very successfully balanced our roll there, even with a huge lead stick on the side, without making any adjustments whatsoever to our actual propulsion. So that is actually extremely powerful. If basically what it's doing here, PIDs are doing a numerical analysis of what point do I want to get to and what is my input point. And so they're taking, let's say in the pitch direction, they're saying I want to be at 0 pitch, and what is my current pitch? And they're taking the difference between those two and using a numerical analysis method to figure out what the output pitch control should be. Then up here on the rotors, that is transferred to the rotors, and we have on our spin rate control, we have our pitch up rotational movement set at 1.0, which means 100% of that input is coming out here into our rotational movement. So 100% of these spin blocks can be used for rotational movement. And really all that's doing, we're not telling this vehicle anything about its weight, we're not telling it anything about its balance, but we are getting perfect flight out of the deal. We're not telling these spinners on the left side of the vehicle but they need to spin faster than those on the right side of the vehicle because our center of mass is off balance because of this stupid lead stick. But we're getting effectively what we want out of the vehicle just because the numerical analysis is saying, hey, you're not in line with the center, try and get back there, and here's how, let's try and balance that over time. Alright, so the reasoning behind all of this, behind the settings for these, gain, you want that to be as high as possible because that is effectively saying what is the ratio of input that we're going to consider. So the more your gain, or the higher your gain is, the faster you're going to respond to a change in input. So the integral term here is the sum of error over time. If we have a fixed set point of 5 degrees and our current input, say our current pitch is 0 degrees, then we're going to try and pitch up to 5 degrees. We've got an input of 5. So the gain is multiplying off of that. The integral is taking that error over time and saying, yes, we want to push further up. And the longer you're off of the ideal pitch, the more the integral is going to accumulate that error and say, yes, we need to go up to that pitch. So if I have a pitch of 30 degrees and I have a fixed set point of 0, we need to nose down to, or by 30. And that's going to introduce a lot of error. So the integral is going to add up very quickly. And the gain is a multiplier that indicates how much we're going to do that. So, just set that way too high. Actually, this is a good example. Gain, if I set this way too high, you can see I'm getting jitter here again. If I lower that gain back to a reasonable rate, you can see the jitter slowly goes away. I've still got a little bit going on in the background. I don't know if that will come through on YouTube or not, but there's just a tiny bit going on in the background. So I'm going to keep lowering that. Keep lowering it. And right about there, yeah, right about there is just about perfect. Okay, so integral is our error over time. What does the derivative represent? Well, the derivative helps dampen oscillation. So the integral is going to help counter jitter. The derivative is going to help counter wobble. And wobble can be introduced if your integral is too aggressive. So you want to be a little bit careful about the integral, and that's why you want to try and keep it low if possible. But the derivative is your damping term. The higher this is, the longer you set this to, the more damping you're going to apply. So you don't want to set this too high because derivative will get out of control very quickly and start introducing jitter and all sorts of weird issues if this is set too high. So yeah, keep your gain as high as possible on the low end of this scale usually, and keep your integral and derivative as low as possible, and you're going to balance out a PID pretty quickly. Alright, so there's a few differences between how From the Depths handles PIDs and how real PID works. PIDs are not a thing exclusive to From the Depths, by the way. PIDs have been used since the 1920s, really, in a lot of different applications. They're used for naval control, they're used for really anything that uses or needs a numerical stabilization method. Anything you can sense an input and you need to get an output that has nothing to do with the input whatsoever but can be used to stabilize that input, then PID is your tool for that. And they've been used in robotics all over the place. They're really used everywhere. If any of you have ever tinkered with a 3D printer, those use PID control for the temperature in the hot end and also on the heated bed. PIDs are just absolutely everywhere and they're really fun to tinker with. However, it's important to note PIDs are different between From the Depths and how most other applications use them. A From the Depths PID has three terms: a gain, an integral, and a derivative. The derivative and integral are in time segments, and that's not normal. Most PIDs throughout history have used three different gains. You have an input gain. That's a gain that multiplies off of the difference between the set point and the input. You have an integral gain, which is a multiplier off the time, and usually the integral is calculated over a fixed length. So that's usually been defined in electronics by how much memory you have in a lot of applications, because memory for a long time was very limited. You couldn't really fit a whole lot of memory or keep track of a whole lot of things in a computer or a robotic application. So the integral would often be tracked over a specific time frame, and that time frame would be calculated based on how many values we can store and how fast we're taking measurements. The derivative is very similarly calculated with another gain value that multiplies off of a fixed time gate again. So really the PIDs that From the Depths uses are a little bit different than how you normally see these used, and it's really not normal the way From the Depths has them set up. That being said, it is very possible to make a perfectly valid and useful vehicle using a From the Depths PID. It works just fine. It's just a different way of doing things. Alright, that's really how a PID is used and how you set one up. That's really all there is to tuning these things. You can do some crazy stuff with this, and really they do a fantastic job of responding to very strange circumstances. If I was to put a bunch of weight on the front of this vehicle, that pitch PID has us back and stable, just like that. If I add even more weight, again, this stick up here is being nearly perfectly balanced. That's the power of a well-tuned PID. It doesn't care what the characteristics of the vehicle are like, because it's using a purely numerical analysis method, using a bit of calculus actually, to determine what the difference is between where we are in a specific axis in this case and where we want to be. It's very simple in concept. The math for it is actually very easy to implement when you take a look at it, but the effects are just so amazing, and it's really a tool that if you can figure out how these are used, you'll find so many uses for these things. It's amazing. Really, it's a fantastic tool, and I would recommend that everyone learn to tune a PID properly, whether or not you are actually looking at From the Depths. There are so many applications for this. If you ever go into anything related to engineering or computer science or robotics or anything along those lines. Alright, so that's it for today, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks.